Welcome, everyone. I'm and Judith as well. We work at Coventry University. We have this Organic Plus consortium, which is in total 25 partners of all sorts of researchers, universities, NGOs. The project is kind of started with its kickoff meeting in 2018. So we are basically more than halfway through the project. We have two projects, Organic Plus and Relax, and we will today mainly talk about copper, peat, and other fertilizers, but not so much about the antibiotics and other parts.
This is a brief presentation about a very specific crop system that takes place in the southeast of Spain. Well, as you can imagine, the crops are threatened by different pests, not only insects and mites, but also many different pathogens.
So I'll be presenting the environmental assessment of alternatives to fossil-based mulching plastics and peat substrate in greenhouse tomatoes. So to conduct an LCA, we need to define what's called the goal and scope of the study. Part of this is outlined here, where the goal is to assess the environmental impacts of greenhouse tomatoes using different types of seedling substrate and mulching materials. Some important conclusions, improvements, and limitations that we found were that the source of the starch for the bioplastic, where the bioplastic starch came from, was really important.
I'm going to be talking about the trials we have done over the last 2 years on table olives to avoid the use of copper in table olives. Most of the tree plantations in Greece are olive trees. Most of the farmers which apply pesticides, fertilizers, irrigation, and pruning every year, they actually apply almost 3 times the copper quantity allowed per hectare per year. Our conclusion is that the biostimulants combination tried could be used as an alternative to copper fungicides.
The citrus yield is threatened by pathogens and pests, and the most common devastating phytopathogenic fungi are, of course, Plenodomus, Phytophthora, Penicillium, but that are commonly found in Mediterranean region. We started with the identification of alternative copper products that were evaluated in vitro against the most common phytopathogenic fungi and bacteria.
We asked the question, and we feel that we can say, yes, we can now adapt our DSSs to use alternatives, but we need stronger compounds. The ones we have today is not good enough under very conducive conditions. They can work with very resistant cultivars and especially under less conducive conditions. We need to test new compounds in the lab and on the field conditions. I'm sure that the big companies are working so hard to come up with new compounds. So we are looking forward to see some that works a little bit better than the ones we have seen in many presentations today. And we also need education and training, both of the farmers, extension also, and there might be some regulation. It could be avoid dumps and volunteer plants.
So yet, on the Ornique print, you can find 24 articles on contentious input alternatives, 17 on breeding, and 17 articles on soil or culture, 6 on alternative to copper, and 1 on alternative to plastic mulching.
We did have to do a high number of tentative tests, and getting a fiber with a specific quality is difficult. And the different extruded settings affect the physical properties like water holding capacity, particle size distribution, etc., etc. A very high influence on the raw material, on the fiber also is the raw material and the raw material water content. And there was also no fiber we produced that reached the water holding capacity of peat. It was always smaller. But the distance between the water holding capacity values from the 10 centimeter and the 50 centimeter water column was always smaller than the distance between the water holding capacity of peat. So the difference in between the 50 centimeter and 10 centimeter water column was always smaller.
Well, we are generally working on peat alternatives in Catalonia. If we want to replace peat, searching for different materials, first we have to prospect to find new raw materials. Then we have to characterize them. And first step is to transform the raw materials in another material more cured, for example, as by means of composting. And probably we may want to transform this material making fibers.
We can say that the extruded material did not work, at least the tested ones. Nitrogen starvation can be one of the reasons. The treatment that was just compost was the best, even best than peat. And at the end of the experiment, the low level of fertility can be one of the things that must be improved.
We started our cooperation around the biochar, so we started to use a biochar as a natural filler to fossil polymers like polypropylene and polyethylene. And next, we tried to add that kind of filler to biodegradable polymers. And that's why we started a cooperation with Wojciech Pawlikowski from Noweco. And it was also a proposal in Organic Plus project to use the biochar, milled biochar into the mulch films.
Our trials had a number of aims. We were interested in comparing the performance in the first instance of a range of biodegradable and non-biodegradable plastics with regard to their ability to suppress weeds, the effect on the crop yield and quality, how rapidly they degraded, either biodegraded or just degraded generally. So the interim conclusions, as I say, the work's going on, is that the black fill mulches effectively suppress the weeds. Even a mulch that broke down, however, before the end of the growing season could be worthwhile, depending on the crop.
For co-composting, in Turkey we have many different artificial plant residues. As you can see in the slide, as we are co-composting organic materials such as grass clippings, chopped olive pruning branches, and artificial residues of medicinal and aromatic plants. Turkey has enormous number of available areas for organic farming, so we worked and conducted paper trials to screen mulch material in one of the organic medicinal and aromatic plant cropping farm.
On to the take-home message from here, we need to introduce nutrients in order to be more climate friendly and effective. And of course, we don't want to compromise the consumer credibility, and we think that recycling can be, it already is, but it can be a bigger part of the solution in Denmark at least. And then this digestate from household waste as a fertilizer is similar to pig slurry in many ways. It has a much lower amount of heavy metals, but it does contain plastic.
Why do we want to analyze the fertilizers? In organic horticulture works a lot without animal husbandry. Therefore, we are strongly dependent on external commercial fertilizers. What are the solutions? For example, we can use clover class-based fertilizers from the farm itself or from other sources that are vegan and are from organic origin.
We have been working with fertilizers derived from leftover materials from marine industry, like catching of fish, which could be an alternative for conventional animal manure. Of course, you need to incorporate the manure in the soil, and to apply 600 kilo of nitrogen, it's far too high in the field experiment with dry grass. The growth effect of the acid-conserved fish bones is very rapid, that we have confirmed several times. The fresh fish bones, they also have positive effect, but it is less rapid. And what we could observe with some bags buried in the soil, you see on the right side, they're very popular feed for soil animals.
I think the first group one, that was led by Atla.
Hello. I will make a brief minute. Everyone, there were expressed positive thoughts about this webinar, and I found it very interesting to follow. We discussed a little bit about the first bullet point and what could be changed for the next period or something. It could be that we could have more more focus on practical solutions, as for instance machinery, and what kind of machineries farmers actually needs to take our solutions into practice, and also more clear what practical solution we could offer and take into use for farmers.
The results we received so far are very promising, and there was also indication that it would be probably a good recommendation to go even further into larger experiments, larger plots preferably organized at organic farms.
I think at least two of us commented that it was really interesting to see other people's work, especially maybe the work of either work that's very, very different to our own that we didn't really know much about, or in my case, it was interesting to see the parallel work going on. So colleagues in Germany who are doing something similar to us but different, and people in Turkey who are doing very similar to trials to ours. Mahesh, who's here from our International Advisory Board, he had some quite interesting points to make. He was talking about the differences between a lot of the research that's going on in India at the moment, quite similar challenges to ourselves, but being dealt with quite differently and slightly different issues.
More information is needed to evaluate system solutions rather than just looking at sort of kind of one product versus another, and also to consider inputs that are not normally considered, particularly energy, both sort of for kind of tractor fuel energy, but also energy for tunnels and greenhouses, and also the kind of the kind of embodied energy in particular kinds of infrastructure. That's perhaps maybe more important sometimes than people appreciate. So more information and more consideration of those things to better evaluate the results.
Another topic that is in developing, because there's a great development in people interested in vegan food, is to work more with the vegan fertilizers, because there's also quite a lot of confusion connected to this topic.
There was one big issue also about the peat alternatives, so that it would make sense also to have a look at commercially available products which are already in the market as a kind of control, so that we also have a short-term solution at the end of the project which we can hand over to the farmers, because obviously there's still a lot to work on with the fibers. And then there would be also another option to go and contact companies which are already using these wood fibers, just to speed up the process of further development within the project.
Another idea was that perhaps the plastic, the transparent plastic, could be used for solarization in Almeria, in the south of Spain. This application can be useful. And another question is the copper thing that we saw that it comes from manure and also for phytosanitary treatments. So really it's a very important topic.
Gabriela also said she would be mounting a project surrounding the effect and relationship between alternative treatments to copper and their metabolites, like biological treatments, and their effect on the soil microbiome. So could we use these to create symbiotic relationships or beneficial relationships? And since right now there is not on the effect of alternatives on soil microbiome, it could be a very good follow-up proposal. She also liked the fact that Organic Plus allowed us to work partly in the field and in the lab, and for a variety of crops.
The last thing we talked about was barriers, because many times in such projects, sometimes there is not enough time to look at the barriers for implementing the things that are being investigated. And that's what we are trying in VP6 to provide some guidelines how you can implement these new technologies and these new input systems into the whole farm system.
Thanks once again for everybody that's come and taken part.
I thank you, Judith, for kind of, running such a nice ship. But I also want to thank specifically Nikos and Anne-Kristin, who have kind of really organized this webinar.
Thank you, Ulrich. Thank you. Also, I'd like to thank everybody for joining this webinar.
Thank you very much, and especially also because so many people joined the meeting.